Good morning. How's everybody doing? Yeah, well, you're here. We'll see if you still feel about that same way after I'm done. But so again, my name is Jeff Crume. I'm a security architect with IBM. As you can tell from the strange accent, I'm not from here. I live in the U.S. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I don't know if you'd pick that accent out or not. But nevertheless, the topic I'm going to talk about today is, to me, one of the most fascinating, and which is why I was drawn to it in the first place. I hope you'll find that it is as well. This notion of artificial intelligence, we've been hearing about, I can remember for as long as I've been dealing with computers, and given my advanced age, that's been a long time. So 36 years with IBM, and I've always been hearing, next year was when we were going to have AI, or it was about 5 years out, and it was kind of a moving target, and whatever year you were in, it was 5 years away. It's happening now. And so I'll give you some examples of that during the talk. But some of the things that I thought would be useful to talk about, I'm going to start off with a video.
Do you know who Tony Stark is? Do you know who Iron Man is? Would you be interested in having a Tony Stark-like experience with your computer? I am Mike Spisak, IBM Master Inventor. Kids like Evan, they're not clouded by requirements or constraints. They have this sort of can-do attitude. As usual, Evan pops down into my office one day and he's looking over my shoulder to see what I'm working on. And I'm showing him how you can chat with Watson through the keyboard. And he said to me, "Dad, why can't you talk to it with your voice?" So we started to search around a little bit about different ways we could do this, right?
We decided to order a Raspberry Pi touchscreen, and you can talk to it from there.
We wired up Watson, and an hour later, we were talking to it. The experience of talking to Haven is very similar to an experience you might have with talking to other voice-enabled technologies.
Haven, help me understand ransomware.
I like to look at Haven a little bit more as a specialist. It's helping you specifically to understand and work on cybersecurity events.
Haven, tell me about those threats.
The most serious threat is at risk level 7.7 and is titled Firmware AirWatch Enrollment Security Bypass. Shall I pull it up on screen?
No, thank you.
A company could see upwards of 200,000 security events a day. It doesn't matter how many people we have focused at that particular problem, it will never be enough to get ahead of the vast amount of data that's being generated. Cognitive technologies are going to enable us to get ahead of that curve by processing this information quicker and at a large scale. We're always trying to think of new ways to leverage Watson and cognitive to address offenses and vulnerabilities. I think the best of Haven is still yet to be discovered. I think the best of Watson is still waiting to be invented by somebody. Maybe it's Evan,
It would be really cool to have such a big impact on the way people live. We're still adding on new things, and I don't think we're done yet.
To be able to share those experiences with him makes me really, really proud of him. As a dad, what more can you ask for? To be able to share your passion for technology with your son who is equally as passionate about it. It's really special.
Okay, so there you go. We've been working on the Watson technology. I'll talk a little more about what that is and what it's capable of and what we've done in the real world with it. But there's an example that I think is interesting because we think of AI as a dehumanizing thing, and here you see a very human story. Here's a father and a son working on a technology, and kids, as he says, are not constrained by some of the limitations that we naturally tend to accept. And so his son says, why are you typing to it when you could talk to it? And so that's what they did, is added a voice interface. So we're going to find voice interface, whether you talk to the system or not, natural language processing is an important part of what we generally consider to be artificial intelligence. So a little bit more about why we need this, and Mike mentions that in the video, but I'll say some of these things, I know I'm preaching to the choir on this. We know that the threats continue to increase, the alerts continue to increase. Relative to the number of threats that are out there, the number of security specialists that we have who can go work on those problems is not increasing at nearly the same rate. So we have a net decline, is the net of that. And you can see the amount of knowledge that it takes. You know, when we were talking about diagnosing issues in times gone by, it was relatively simple. It seemed complex then, but it's nothing compared to what we're dealing with today, this n-dimensional problem that seems to be getting worse all the time. So we're asking more and more from fewer and fewer, and you can see if that trend continues, it's not the good guys that come out on top, it's the bad guys. All of those factors are working in favor of the bad guys. So we've got to do something to turn the tables around differently. And this last statistic is the one that's particularly troubling to me. Now, Mark Twain said you've got lies, damn lies, and statistics. Well, so you can decide whether you want to trust this particular projection or not, but the point is generally there. We have a large gap looming ahead of us in terms of the problem space. The number of cybersecurity experts that it's going to require in order to address the number of problems that we're dealing with, we've got a gap. We cannot make cybersecurity experts fast enough. I mean, look, with current technology, it takes us 9 months to make a human. So even then, you've got a lot more work. You can't just, you know, okay, now we're going to set you to work on this problem. So we're talking about many years in order for us to even start making a dent into that problem if we go with the conventional course and speed. So what are we going to do to address that? I'm going to suggest we have to do a game changer. We're going to have to work smarter. We're going to have to leverage automation more, and we're going to have to leverage other technologies like artificial intelligence in order to allow the number of people we have use this as a force multiplier to be more effective. Otherwise, bad guys win, and we're hoping that's not the case. So a typical security operations center analyst, when they see an incident come across their desk, they've got a lot of things they have to do. And this is just a slight example of what that might be. But there's all sorts of steps that go into the investigation, looking and seeing essentially what are the symptoms, what are the indicators of compromise, what do these things add up to, what does this pattern look like? Have I seen this before? And in a lot of cases we have. But one of the challenges we face in the security area is that we deal with lots of black swans. We deal with these one-off type of events. So automating response comes out to be a difficult thing in most cases. There are some cases where, you know, in other words, put it this way, if you want to automate something, you have to know in advance what you're going to do. You can't automate an indeterminate action. So if you are looking at a problem that you've never seen before, a new attack, here's a new type of malware, here's a new attack technique, it's going to be darn near impossible to automate the appropriate response to that because you haven't seen it before. So the focus in many cases needs to be on automation as an assist and orchestration as a way to manage all of the pieces and, again, be force multipliers. But what could we do to simplify this task right here? The investigative phase. If you think about all the information, like I said, that an analyst has to have, it's increasing. But who has time to continue to increase their knowledge base in their head if they're fighting fires all day long? And I don't know about you, but everything I read doesn't mean I retain. And even if I retain it, doesn't mean I'm instantly able to apply it in always the right circumstances. So those are challenges with this sort of carbon-based technology that we are. So again, I'm going to suggest silicon might be able to help us here. So let's take a look about AI, artificial intelligence, everybody and his dog is talking about this these days. All the vendors, I'm sure, are hitting you over the head with their wonderful AI capabilities. And so here I am to do the same thing, you're thinking. So what I'm going to try to do, though, is at least level the playing field in terms of understanding. What is AI? Well, it's a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but we'll start with a few definitions that we could hopefully agree on. So the first is, Webster says it's a branch of computer science dealing with the simulation of intelligent behavior in computers. Sounds simple enough, nothing objectionable, I think, about that. Except, what is intelligent behavior? So it's easy to say, but it's another thing to define. We think of humans as intelligent beings, but I can tell you not all of them are all that intelligent. So, you know, what defines that? What do we consider? What level of intelligence do we consider it to be intelligent, right? Oxford English Dictionary, the theory of and development of computer systems able to perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech, recognition, decision-making, and translation between languages. So now you start to see a little further definition of what that intelligence might mean through a few examples. Because generally we would take those actions, those abilities to do those kinds of things and say, something that could do that, we think possesses intelligence, because we think it requires intelligence to accomplish some of those things. So what does it all really boil down to? AI is essentially involves making computers more able to match or exceed human intelligence in its various forms by mimicking the human ability to discover, infer, and reason. Notice how in all of these definitions, we're comparing whatever the AI thing is to us. So we think we are the top, and we're trying to make other systems be able to do what we're able to do. Now, when our alien overlords arrive, we may decide that we set the bar too low in terms of what was the ultimate objective. But until then, we don't know of things that are more intelligent than us, so we don't have any other basis to compare to. So we'll continue to use us as an example. And what we'll want to be able to do, I think it's important to think about AI as a group of technologies, plural, as opposed to a single technology. So we'll tend to talk about them as a group because it's easier to do that. But in fact, if someone says, you know, my product is doing AI or I'm doing AI research, they could be doing any one of these things and be very different than what someone else is doing. So you can see some of the possibilities here. Reasoning and problem solving, and that one's actually really very hard. If you think about what we're talking with an intelligent system, a cognitive system, that's very different than what I was trained to create back when I was in school and dinosaurs roamed the earth and that sort of thing. We were programming systems, and that's what, of course, most systems are still programmed systems. Programming, if you think about it, as its essence, is taking the intelligence of the programmer, codifying that into a procedure, and then putting that into a system so that it can run repeatedly based upon certain inputs, then give you certain outputs. But we've kind of frozen the intelligence of the programmer, captured that, codified it, and put it into the system. That's a programmed system. That's what we all learned in computer science to create for the most part. A cognitive system thinks on its own and learns on its own. Now, it may start off really, really stupid. And by the way, so do humans. If you don't believe me, go look at little kids, and what do? Every time they see something, it goes right in the mouth. So that's how they're trying to learn. And they're trying to figure out, you know, is this edible or not? You know, what is it like? So as we grow, we start to learn more things, and then hopefully we learn everything doesn't go in the mouth first, although there's a few. Then some other things that we do here, knowledge representation, planning. Now, planning is an interesting thing. That's something we all take for granted, and we do it a million times a day. Simple things that we plan out. I'm not talking about looking at your calendar. I'm talking about planning if I'm going to, you know, how I walk down these stairs. And I need to move this way, and then I need to move one foot in front of the other, and this sort of thing. It's all automatic to us, but there was a step of planning involved in doing that. Some other things like perception, recognizing things. So that chair, until I came here today, I've never seen a chair that looks exactly like that chair. but I've seen an awful lot of chairs in my life. And when I looked at that, I knew it was a chair. You didn't have to tell me that because it had certain qualities that made it chair-like. Now, if we were talking about a programmed system, we'd have to train it that that's a chair, and then the next one that comes along, we'll have to train it that one is a chair, and the next one is a chair, and the next one is a chair, and all the infinite number of chairs that we have. But in this case, an intelligent being is able to see that there are certain things here and generalize, extrapolate, and in most of the times we're right. Sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we suffer from bias. And we say, that thing looks like a chair, we go sit on it, and then we find out, no, it really wasn't, and the thing falls apart. Okay, so sometimes we're not always right, but we do those kind of judgments. Those are all aspects: creativity, general intelligence, social intelligence. Again, we're all different in terms of our own intelligence, so it's not surprising that computer science would lead us to different areas within AI and different disciplines. Now, when someone says, I've got a security tool that does AI, it's not doing all of that, for sure. So no one that I'm aware of has an AI system that does all of that simultaneously. So everyone's picking out pieces of this, subfields of this, and trying to focus on it. Some of the terms that you'll see here are the focus, especially within the security space. What most of the vendors are doing is this thing here called machine learning. So machine learning is a subfield of AI and computer science that has as its roots statistics and mathematical optimization. So machine learning is where the system, there's two different types, supervised and unsupervised machine learning, but you're basically doing a sort of statistical analysis, building patterns, and then making generalizations from those patterns, drawing conclusions from those patterns. So it's again, rooted in statistics. So that's, but we're allowing the system to go off and discover and give us insights back that we otherwise would have to mine out on our own in minute detail. Deep learning, you can see a little bit different version of that, but machine learning is what most people are doing. If a vendor tells you they've got a security product that does AI, it's probably machine learning. And that's good, because we're doing, as an industry, a lot of people are doing some really cool stuff with machine learning that is simplifying the job of SOC analysts and so forth. But there's some other aspects. Those are aspects of AI. Cognitive computing is another type of AI that leverages machine learning and deep learning and some other things like natural language processing. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move along. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to leave these. Hopefully, I think everyone will be able to download the slides and you can take a look and read these definitions on your own. But I'm going to flip through this for right now and talk a little bit more about sort of a hierarchy of computing capabilities moving us more and more toward an intelligent system. So we start off with some really basic stuff here, basic search capabilities, pattern matching, correlation, and rules. Most of our early generation of security information event management systems were essentially, we had log management systems where we could do search, collect all the logs from all of our systems, and then go back and search on them. And then the SIMs would come along and start doing this, and now the better security of information and event management systems are able to do this sort of analytics. That's really where everybody's going when they're talking about data lakes and mining insights and this sort of stuff. This is where we are. But cognition is a different thing. Cognition is another turn of the crank. That's where the system is really thinking. It's reasoning. It's not just looking at a data set and saying, okay, I think this is the next one in the series, or this is the outlier. That's all really important stuff. But there's more to it than that if we're talking about actually comprehending. So I'll give you an example of something that certainly when this first came out, I mean, remember the early search engines on the internet were not great. If you put in a search term, you generally got back a lot of information, and about 2/3 of it was really not what you were looking for, and maybe the one that you really wanted was on about the second or third page of the search results, but it certainly wasn't likely to be in the top 3. Well, now Google came along and revolutionized that. And now, most of the time, if you have a reasonably well-formed search, whatever you're looking for is probably in the top 2 or 3 of results it's going to return. So we'd say that's pretty smart. Is it AI? Is it cognitive? And I'm going to suggest to you that it's not for this reason. Here's an example. If you put this in to Google, show pictures of everything except pink elephants, and we all know what that means. And what does Google return to you? Exactly a bunch of pictures of pink elephants. Now, why did it do that? Now, by the way, if you asked me, Jeff, give me a bunch of pictures of everything except pink elephants, and then that's the only thing I brought you back, you'd say, Jeff, you're a moron. What is wrong with you? Did you not hear what I said? But we don't say that because Google does some amazing stuff in the other types of cases. But you can see it's missing does it really understand what you're asking for? No, because what it's doing is keyword search. It looked for and found pink elephants, images, pictures. Okay, I know what that is. Here you go. And it missed the intent of what the query was. So if we're going to have really artificial intelligence, it's got to understand the full intent, the full context of all these things that are happening. Sometimes we say something at one point and it means a different thing than what it would mean if you said exactly the same words at a different time, in a different context. And we're used to understanding that context all the time. Sometimes we have misunderstandings, but generally humans manage that sort of misunderstanding or confusing ambiguity pretty well. All right, how about AI in the real world? I've talked about the abstract, the definitions of the terms, that sort of stuff. Is this stuff real? What can it really do? So IBM, I think it was about 6 years ago, decided with the Watson system, and I'm going to talk about this in terms of a use case. So this is not, we don't have a machine that you can buy. If you want to win at Jeopardy, we will not sell you the Watson system so that you can go win. But this was to basically, like a lot of things, if you think about when we sent humans to the moon for the first time, we had to develop a lot of underlying technologies in order to support that. And there were a lot of things that came out of the space program that weren't necessarily space related, but they were still really important supporting technologies, like Velcro and Tang. I mean, what would we do without Tang? Evidently a lot, because I haven't seen it in a long time, so maybe that one's time has passed. But so this was one of those kind of grand challenges that we say, if we could make a system that was smart enough to win at Jeopardy, now that would be something. Now, why is that something? Why is that a big deal? We had already made a system, Deep Blue, that was winning at chess and beating grandmasters around the world. And you would think, gosh, chess is an infinitely complex game to play. If you could really play that and beat the best in the world, then you must be a super genius. But the system that plays chess and beats grandmasters cannot tie its own shoes. I mean, it can't do some other really rudimentary things that you and I would think would be expected. Jeopardy is a very different type of problem than chess is. First of all, in Jeopardy, you're given answers and then you formulate questions as your response. So that's just a little bit weird. The second thing is Jeopardy uses a lot of figures of speech, idioms, puns, rhymes, plays on words, all of this kind of stuff, as a way that is in fact part of the clue. So if you read it literally and you don't have the context of what those kind of sort of jokes and twists mean, you will absolutely get the question wrong. So you've got to not only understand literally what the words mean, but what they mean in that context and what they're referring to in some sort of twisted ways at times. That's not necessarily the way we tend to think of that word, but oh yeah, it kind of also has this other meaning as well. That's what makes it complex. And then the other things that make it complex are, to win at Jeopardy, you can't just be an expert on geography. You have to also know arts, you have to know sports, you have to know history, you have to know politics, you have to, food, all these different subjects. So it's so many different domains. It's really rare for someone to be expert in so many different domains and be able to think that quickly, because speed is what you have to win with this as well. If you're slow as I am, even if you come up with the right answer, it's not going to matter. They're already on to the next question. So you've got to be fast. Oh, and then there's this other thing. If you answer incorrectly, you lose points. So before you decide to chime in, you have to have decided whether this is worth taking the risk. How confident am I in my answer? And do that sort of risk calculation. Now, humans do this all the time in really fast moments. We had a system that was going to have to do all of that, but the hardest part of that, I think, is dealing with the arbitrariness of our language and trying to sort through that. And if any of you speak, I'm sure many of you speak more than one language. Whichever one, if you were very familiar with one language first, when you first started learning the other, sometimes somebody would tell you a joke and it didn't make any sense. You translate it literally, you get the words out, but it's not funny. And then as you start to understand the idiosyncrasies of the language, then you start to get it. So Watson had to understand all of that in order to win. So that was the challenge we were up against. And you would think in order to win that, you'd have to be pretty smart. And you do. And in fact, Watson competed against 2 former grand champions of Jeopardy and beat them like rented mules. It really wasn't all that close. So this was remarkable. And I can tell you, this was on national TV for 3 nights, I think, in a row that they showed this at an IBM facility. And look, there were a lot of nervous executives when this was going on, because this was our chance to fail in front of the world or succeed. And thankfully, we succeeded with this. And it made a big splash, and then everything went quiet for a long time. And then we started seeing the practical, real-world examples of applying that kind of technology. And the one that I like best is one that was profiled on 60 Minutes. I assume you're familiar with the show in the US, a news magazine that's weekly. So this happened, this was profiling work that was done at the University of North Carolina Lineberger Cancer Center. Now, I live in North Carolina, in Raleigh, so this is about 25 miles away from me, so not too far away. So that made it feel even more close to home. But what they did in this particular profile is, to give you a background, I wasn't an expert in this, so I'm just telling you what I saw from the story. Apparently at the best cancer centers, that's where you end up with some of the toughest cases. So if someone responds to traditional therapies, great. They go home and they're in good shape. If they don't, what's next? Well, you go to see the specialist, and they have what they call a tumor board. So a doctor comes and presents a patient's case in front of a room full of other specialists who are experts in the field. And they all discuss the case and then make recommendations of what other alternative therapies to try. And this is normal mode of operation. So the thought here was, okay, taking on Jeopardy was a really hard problem. Why don't we see what we can do about cancer? Now that sounds nuts to me, to even suggest that we could try to make a dent in that. And of course there's no cure for cancer in the abstract, in the large, but make a dent in the way it's treated would be even, they talk about the impact to humanity in doing something like that. So they started working on teaching Watson the language of oncology, the language of cancer treatment, which is not simple, right? And it turns out that there are 8,000 new medical research papers published every day. So if you're on the tumor board, it would be really good if you had read all of those every day so you could apply the latest research to every single case that came into you. But we can't even read 8,000 pages a day, much less 8,000 papers. And you can imagine what research papers read like. This is not going to be trivial stuff. So that's beyond human capacity to do. It's not beyond the capacity of a cognitive system to consume that level of information, build a knowledge graph, and be able to apply that. That was our thought. So why don't we try to teach Watson this? And of course, initially, just like a human, like a child, when they first start learning, they learn a lot of ridiculous stuff and say some things that are kind of crazy and kind of funny and stuff like that. Sometimes it's not funny. So we have to realize, it's going to take us a while to ramp this up. So when I tell you about all of these great possibilities, I'm also wanting to temper this with the understanding that, again, think of the way a child learns. Sometimes they'll give you moments of brilliance followed by hours of unbelievable stupidity, it seems. Like how did you possibly think that was a good idea to do that? And then hopefully if they live long enough, they get to learn from those mistakes and do better. So what we had to do, though, this is serious stuff. So we needed to make sure that this system really understood and was going to act, first of all, safely, efficaciously. The Hippocratic Oath, first thing, do no harm. So they tested it. studied 1,000 patients who had already been through the tumor board. Tumor board had given their recommendation. Now we're going to see what Watson would have done with these had they been presented to that system. And it came out that it matched 99% of the time. Now that's pretty good, because I think if you've got 10 doctors, you probably, in a room, you're likely to have 15 opinions. So the notion of building a system that's going to match the collective expertise of a bunch of doctors who don't even all agree is a hard task. And to do that 99% of the time means this is a big deal, especially for all those people who won't have access to a tumor board. Think about the vast number of people in the world who will never have their cases presented because there's only so many cancer centers and only so many experts. So all of a sudden, this starts making this much more available. Watson found this was a really cool part. In 30% of the cases, additional therapies that the tumor board didn't think to recommend, yet once they looked at them said, yeah, this would be a good idea. So I'm not talking about let's go recommend the patient drink chicken's blood. This is stuff that seemed like it made sense to try. So I think that's breakthrough stuff. Now, it doesn't mean cancer is cured, of course. And Watson's going to make mistakes just like doctors make mistakes. And the same treatment that cures one person kills another one. So this is hard stuff to do here. So don't expect miracles, but this is progress. And this is not something we could have done with conventional programmed computer systems. I remember one of the first things I wanted to do when I first started back in high school, putting my hands on a computer, I thought, this would be really cool if I could build a flow chart of medical diagnosis. I had wanted to be a doctor before I decided to get into computer science. So I thought, gosh, you could present your symptoms and it would kick out and tell you what you've got. And I was very naive, of course. We still have a hard time with systems doing that sort of thing because there's so many different things and patients present in so many different ways. Some people are asymptomatic and some people have symptoms that point to other things and symptoms overlap. But nevertheless, so that's two applications of artificial intelligence to win at Jeopardy. And I can tell you IBM's business model is not to collect all the Jeopardy winnings because that's not going to be enough revenue to keep the shareholders happy. So we've got to move to other things. So then the next one was oncology. And now we're branching out and doing this in a lot of other spaces. But we're here to talk about cybersecurity. What does all this have to do with, could we take a machine that wins at Jeopardy and is helping treat cancer and have it actually apply that kind of technology to cybersecurity? That would be a cool thing if we could do that. So let's talk about it. What's the problem that we have to deal with? Well, one of the things is the information that we have available to us comes in a lot of different forms. If you look at this iceberg, this stuff up here on the top, up here, security events and alerts, logs, configuration data, user network activity, threat and vulnerability feeds. You can take that and feed that to your SIEM, your Security Information Event Management System, and it eats that stuff for breakfast. Why is it able to make sense of that? Because it's structured. It knows what a log record is supposed to look like coming from a particular source, so you can program a parser to take that and say, okay, the first 5 bytes are this, the next 12 bytes are this, the next 16 bytes are that, and then it reads all those in, and it can start matching patterns, it can start looking for correlations, it can start applying rules and policies, and that's how SIEMs work. So all of that stuff on the top is current course and speed for us. We know how to do that. It's structured data. Now, what happens if you take a Word doc or a PDF or a PowerPoint or a website and feed that to your SIEM? It chokes. Doesn't know what to do with that. Well, whoops, didn't mean to go there yet. What if you take an industry publication, an analyst report, a conference presentation? Let's say we take my presentation from this conference and feed that into your SIEM. Give it the PowerPoint and see what it does. It has no idea what to do with that. A research paper written by security researchers about a new proof of concept attack. Feed that to your SIEM and watch it choke. On the other hand, a cognitive system that understands natural language can read, comprehend, and then reason over that data. So that's a different deal. That's what we as humans do. The problem is we just can't do it fast enough. Because in our field, Now, there's not 8,000 new papers every day in the security space, but there's a lot. It's way more than you can keep up with, believe me. I'm finding this out firsthand the hard way. I'm working on my PhD right now, so I'm trying to read a whole bunch of other papers, and it's just mind-numbing at times to try to get through this stuff and try to remember it all and then create my own contributions to it. So the point being, though, is that we think this stuff up here may be the tip of the iceberg. That may be only about 10% of the security information that's available across the universe. And so we're looking at another 80 or 90% of the information is in unstructured formats. It was designed for humans to consume, not for machines to consume. So that means we need a machine that's smart enough to read like humans, understand like humans, but not make some of the mistakes that we as humans make, not suffer from some of the bias issues and fatigue and just all kinds of other things that we have. So that's what's unique, by the way. I'm going to go back to that one more time to make that point. What a lot of vendors are doing with machine learning is really fantastic stuff, but it's not this. They're not doing this. You're not feeding Word docs into those systems and having them understand what that means and then say, oh yeah, I read a paper the other day and it looks like to me what you have is a malware campaign that matches what this research paper was talking about. That's a different kind of thing. That's a cognitive system. That's different than machine learning. And so I want to underscore that to try to get away from some of the hype and get to what really is happening. So what we've done with Watson then is take and build this, the term is a corpus of information. It's a knowledge base where it's consuming information from lots of different sources all day long. And it's constantly getting smarter and it's constantly growing its base. When we first started doing this, in fact, we used a lot of universities, students to help us with it in the US and in Canada, and training it. It's one thing for it to read all of this stuff, but it's another thing for it to comprehend and make sense of what all this stuff means. And in fact, early on, just like a child, Watson made some really ridiculous kind of conclusions. It thought malware was a place. I don't know how it got to that conclusion, but it read about this and assumed that that was a location. And we had to retrain it. No, that's not what it means. And again, think how a child learns. They will start to put together different unrelated things in a way that you didn't expect, and they'll come to an incorrect conclusion. We correct that thinking, and then they move on. It's the same kind of thing with a cognitive system. So that's why you see some of these ridiculous things as it starts on. And you're going to see reports of systems that don't work in the early days, just like humans don't work in the early days either all that well. But they get smarter over time, and that's what we're trying to do here. So, constantly refreshing this, keeping up with the information that we have. But one of the things that comes up when I've given this presentation before, somebody will say, so what you're talking about is going to replace all of us. And that's not what I'm talking about. In fact, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about we have security analytics today, security information event management systems that are good at this and people aren't. You know, we know that we're not really great at consuming mass quantities of data and correlating on it. You know, if we can correlate, if we can look at, 10, 20, maybe 100 data points and start seeing patterns, but if it comes millions or billions, we don't know what to do with that. We can only see the macro type of correlations. So we have systems that do this, and that's where the statistical analysis and analytics and all that stuff comes into account and helps us. This sort of stuff, anomaly detection, visualization, workflow, prioritization based upon rules and things like that. So that's what SIMs do really well. What a cognitive system does really well is this, unstructured analysis. Looking at natural language, like you saw in the video at the beginning, or in documents written for humans to read, reading that, understanding it, comprehending it, applying it, using machine learning, doing Q&A with the system. So you could ask it questions like the kid was doing, with Haven, which is the name of the voice interface into this. Bias elimination, I mentioned earlier, is a big deal for us because we will tend to see what it is. If we go in looking for something, that's what we'll tend to find, which means we may miss the things we're not looking for. Now, a computing system, though, can be trained to look for everything at the same time. Like when I look at this room, as I scan, there's just billions and billions of pixels of graphical data hitting the back of my retinas. It's all hitting there, but I'm not processing all of it because my brain isn't fast enough to deal with all of that. So what do I tend to focus on? Well, I tend to focus on the people. Now, there's not more information in the visual image in a person than there is in all the other things around, but that's our bias. We'll tend to focus on people before I focus on chairs. And that's helped us evolutionarily. Our forebears, who were better at focusing on chairs than humans, didn't replicate so much. Therefore, we don't have their genes. So that's how we've ended up as we are. So the point here being, a cognitive system is designed to do some of these things and eliminate some of the bias. It can look at a situation in a neutral way and then see what really does stand out. Well, where's the place for us? Well, it turns out neither of these technologies are really very good at any of this. Morals, dilemmas, trade-offs. Okay, we're under attack. What are we supposed to do about it? Remember, this is a black swan. We can't automate it. We've never seen this before. What's the appropriate action? Do I shut this down because we're getting an attack? Well, maybe in certain circumstances I would shut that down, but then in other certain circumstances, shutting it down may be me basically doing a denial of service on my own organization. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to shut the whole business down. So there's decisions, and this is the kind of stuff that we excel at, because we're not great at finding the needle in the haystack. But if you give us a bunch of needles, we can start to tell you what these mean and how we can use them. So there's a place for all of us in this, is the other thing. My other part of the answer to that question is about this replacing people. Who are we going to replace? Remember that shortage, that skills gap that I said we have? 1.8 million people? We can't afford to be replacing people. We can't make enough people. We're going to have to make the people a lot more effective. So that's not really the issue. In fact, it's been referred to sometimes as AI at this stage. It's augmented intelligence. It's not a replacement. It's augmenting what humans could otherwise be doing. So this is an example of what we might be able to do. Take a knowledge graph that includes literally millions or even billions of data points, of nodes, of not just think about IP addresses, but think about all the different items or objects within that IP address, all the different things that are running on your system that all correspond to one IP address. And represent all of that in one big graph, and then try to figure out which part of that is related to the incident that I'm seeing on my screen right now across the entire network, and how it might relate to other people's networks that are not under my control. Well, this is what we're doing as an example with this. So here you see a visualization that shows a malware campaign, and it's showing you the graph that shows just the affected nodes in that. So it's filtering out all the other stuff that's not so important. And you could, with this, potentially figure out who did what, who was the first one to be infected, who did they infect, who are the bad actors, who are the ones that are unintentionally being affected in sort of a drive-by kind of way, and so forth. And so I know it's going to be impossible to read here, but the language down here, after it's done its analysis, is it basically comes back and says, you gave me a problem, an incident, and I'm telling you I see much more here. I see hundreds of systems that are affected in a larger campaign, and here's what they all are. And by the way, if you want to understand how I came to that conclusion, I can show you my work. And I can show you my confidence in that conclusion. Because sometimes the system can come to the wrong conclusion. You can look at its confidence and see it's low and say, okay, I'm not going to bet the farm on this particular conclusion. And then other cases, oh yeah, that's really solid. I'm going to look at it. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and read the research paper that this AI system used in order to come to that conclusion, so that I can verify it for myself, so I can learn for myself. And that's what's possible. So this is not fiction. This is something that is available today. In fact, we've had some cases where one organization claims a 50x improvement in their investigation time. So that this is not isolated. So now some people experience better or worse results. Your mileage may vary, all those caveats and things like that. Depends on to a great extent how well tuned your sim system is, and then how well you're able to take advantage of this. What feeds have you added into it and that sort of stuff. So I don't want to get into the specifics of individual products or capabilities, but just to show you what sort of is the art of the possible, and more than anything to whet your appetite for what the future could lead to this, because we are still in the very earliest of days with this. And you'll see things, I mean, with the typical, what is it, Gartner has the hype curve, and we hit the trough of disillusionment. That's coming. For some, it's already there. But then after the trough of disillusionment comes the reality. Then we start moving in a more steady state, and we start actually getting problems solved, as opposed to just a lot of hype. And so hopefully that's the area that we're headed to next, because I think we've hit the hype curve part pretty strong. And you may think my talk just did. I hope not. If you want a little more information, more reading and things like this on the subject, there's a website here. I've included the link. This is about sort of what IBM's doing in this space. If my talk, I went too fast and you want to go a little bit slower, then we've got Artificial Intelligence and Cybersecurity for Dummies. And if that is too elementary, then we have a paper that's essentially Artificial Intelligence and Security by Dummies. And I am one of those. So it was a couple of colleagues of mine and me, and we went together and put this frequently asked questions document together to try to, and that's what a lot of this presentation is based on, by the way. I didn't have anything to do with the Dummies book. I was the dummy on the other paper. So if you want to do some reading and kind of take this at your own pace, then you can do that. So that's what those resources are there for. And I think with that, I am done.